What up, friends, and shalom. Welcome to this episode here of the Watchdog. I am your host, TJ Cox, and I am coming to you live for the first time. Well, no, sorry, not live. But I am coming to you here for the first time in a while, Watchdog or Unapologetics, actually. So just to give a brief update on that for, anybody who may be concerned, which I doubt is anybody, but nonetheless, I ended up being sick and also having a few, debates / interviews that I wanted to get set up that ended up not actually, ended up not going through. So, combination of being sick and also having, certain pre-planned events not actually happening has caused me to not be on these programs for a minute. So, I do apologize for that, but nonetheless, we are moving forward. I do want to announce that I want to kind of, try at least 2 episodes of the Watchdog every week. I think that just the nature of news makes one a week kind of ridiculous because there's so much things I want to talk about. I only have an hour. I end up not being able to talk about these things. And, I just want to make sure that there's ways to get around that. And I think the best way to get around that would just to be doing more shows, right? Because I don't want to make longer shows. So maybe doing more shows. And, maybe that's a good way to get people to more consistently want to watch this program anyway. So it might be good marketing in that sense also. But nonetheless, those are the things we're going to be trying here. I do want to kind of go quickly because there's lots of things I want to talk about here today. But before we get to these articles, few things that I do just want to address in discussion. So first thing, the Supreme Court has actually elected to not hear the Free the Nipple case in New Hampshire. For those of you who watch this program, you know that I thought that was going to be one of the next things going to the Supreme Court. Turns out that I was right in the sense that they did actually go, and appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. But as it turns out, the Supreme Court is not willing to hear this. They did not give any sort of reason why, and so that's going to be where this ends. Unless, of course, they try to, reappeal or something along those lines. That could, of course, end up coming up in the future. But for the time being, the New Hampshire town, I believe it's called Laconia, is going to be perfectly fine in keeping their ordinance. This is definitely a big win for traditionalism and modesty and things like that. Although I would kind of like to see them actually win in court because, that tends to have more of a definitive feel to it. Nonetheless, that's just some news I thought people should be informed with. Weinstein got convicted. He got convicted of rape in the 3rd degree, actually, which means that he had sex with somebody who was unable to give consent, not necessarily that it was like violent or anything like that, or that, they were coerced to the point of a gun or anything like that. I'm not necessarily sure how that ruling is logical, to be honest with you. I mean, the person in question is not mentally handicapped. She wasn't drugged. So I'm not aware. I think really what was happening is that they didn't have any evidence against Weinstein for crimes that he probably did commit, and so they wanted to just get him for something. That is my honest opinion. I do believe that the Weinstein case is weird, as I've shared with you guys before. The casting couch is not only not a crime, but people have been firmly aware of what people like Weinstein have been doing for quite some time, and in fact, they're all in on it. Katy Perry has sexual assault allegations against her. Kevin Spacey had sexual assault allegations against him. Of course, we saw the hundreds and hundreds of people, Melanie Martinez and the dude from That 70s Show and The Ranch, right? I mean, so many people getting these things coming out again, getting these charges, or not charges, but these alleged events that I don't know how you would word that. People are charging them, I guess, with it. It's just not the government. But nonetheless, right, people just being accused constantly. Accusations coming out constantly over and over and over again. And, of course, we know some of them would be nonsense because some people are just interested in getting a name for themselves or potentially getting some money, whether it's hush money or lawsuit money or something along those lines, right? We understand all that. But a lot of it we also do understand was definitely legitimate and kind of a lot more consensual on both sides than people like to admit. And in fact, the unconsensual side of it has been talked about for quite some time as well, by people like Corey Feldman, who was relentlessly bullied and insulted on The View and other programs for having the audacity to speak out against pedophilia in Hollywood. And of course, he's actually got a film that he's producing about that now called A Rape of Two Coreys. which has not actually come out yet. I haven't seen it yet, but I do definitely recommend that you watch it, because I will be watching it when it comes out. It's probably going to have some very important information as far as how this whole thing works. I mean, Weinstein is a patsy, is basically the point that I'm getting at. I think Weinstein is a patsy. I think Weinstein is guilty of the crimes that he is said to have committed, and I also think he's guilty of the non-crimes that he is said to have committed, like casting couches and things like that. And I also think that virtually everybody else, including a lot of the alleged victims, although I'm not saying all of them are, in this, but I do think a lot of them are actually in on it and also do it to other people, right? I think this is a very common thing in Hollywood. Dare I say it's a common thing in politics also, judging by how many people both Weinstein and Epstein were connected to. I mean, consider this. Harvey Weinstein had as an intern Barack Obama's daughter, was thanked personally in a speech by Michelle Obama, and in a separate speech by Hillary Clinton, and in a separate speech by Gwen, what's her name? The woman with 23 Oscars. I'm not familiar. I don't think it's actually Gwen, though. I don't know. I don't care. I don't care about any of her movies. You know what I mean? All these people coming out thanking him constantly, but even though people were completely aware of what was going on, for example, Seth MacFarlane telling jokes about it at the Oscars in 2012, I believe. Not real big on pop culture references, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? So it just reeks of some kind of nefarious conspiracy to me, and I think what it is basically that he's a patsy. He did do everything that he is alleged to have done, crimes and non-crimes. But if you put all the attention on him, it takes all the attention off of all the political people he was associated with and all the other people in Hollywood who were doing the exact same things. So I just wanted to briefly discuss that because, I think with both Weinstein and Epstein being in the news as frequently as they are, we do need to recall and remember that these are people who are not only associated with some of the most high-ranking political figures we know, including the president and the person he ran against in 2016, but also that they are not the problem. There is a greater problem than Jeffrey Epstein, and there's a greater problem than Harvey Weinstein. They are part of the problem, absolutely, but there is a greater problem than just these two, and most of the people you think fight against it are totally in on it, in my opinion. I mean, I'm just telling you with the Katy Perry one because that's one of the more obvious examples of what I'm talking about. Look it up. She's got like 4 different alleged sexual assaults against her, and nobody mentions it at all. There's another singer named Melanie Martinez who was literally alleged of raping somebody. But, I digress. Last thing I wanted to talk about before we get into articles was just the election. I doubted my original prediction, but as it turns out, I actually seem to have had a solid one, so I do want to, not try to brag, but soft pat on the back. I'm totally joking. But it does turn out that it is actually kind of working that way, namely that Bernie Sanders was going to appear to have all the momentum until things actually started, until the rubber actually hit the road, so to speak, and then it was going to go to Biden, a la Ron Paul in 2012 versus Mitt Romney. It does appear that that's actually going to be the case. Now, I also had said, and I still do agree, that the only candidates that were actually going to defeat Trump in the first place were Buttigieg and O'Rourke, Both of them have now left the race, and so I don't actually think that the Democrats will win. They certainly can, right? It's obviously within the realm of possibility, but I personally think that we're going to see Trump become a 2-term president, and that even includes if there is some sort of an economic crash due to the coronavirus and the ensuing panic around the coronavirus. To be honest with you, I think a lot of people are smart enough to realize that this isn't Trump's fault, right? It came from a country that was not the United States. It's affecting numerous countries that are not the United States. In fact, the policies of Donald Trump seem to be the only logical thing preventing against it at this point. Things like closing the borders and being, aware of China's corruption, really, for lack of a better term, because that is what ends up leading to all of the, lack of sanitation, to the lack of food. Potentially, some people say this is a bioweapon. That's obviously an example of corruption. Some people say it came from a exotic meat market. People are only eating exotic meats in China because they were starving to death and had to go out and eat strange animals, right? So that's obviously an example of government corruption. And really, it doesn't matter in the situation, because both of those could be false, and we still know that the numbers are false and skewed, that people were being killed for having the audacity to talk about it, and that the Chinese government was trying to cover this up. So they absolutely positively biffed when it came to this virus, regardless of how it actually formed, and that's an example of government corruption. So, it does appear that Trump on coronavirus has actually, Trump's policies on immigration and China, rather, have been beneficial in coronavirus. And also, I think people are smart enough to realize that. I also think people, sorry about the stutters, I also think people are smart enough to realize that any sort of collapse in the economy at this point is not actually his fault or anyone else's fault, for that matter. If Bernie Sanders was the president when this happened, it wouldn't be his fault either, right? You can't really avoid certain situations. Although to an extent, I think you can. We're actually going to talk about that on the very first article here today. But given the way the government is functioning right now and the way the economy is functioning right now, there's certain situations that you just simply can't avoid. And this is one of them, and I think a lot of people are smart enough to realize that. That said, it does make it seem, a little chaotic, and the Trump administration has always been kind of chaotic, and it might kind of be the straw that broke the camel's back as far as the chaos is concerned. You never know. And that could lead to somebody wanting a return to normalcy candidate, which Joe Biden definitely is. That's his entire appeal. Of course, it could also result in Trump working some sort of economic miracle that causes people to just absolutely adore him. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that could end up going, and it could end up being absolutely nothing, and we forget about this just like Ebola. So we'll see with all that. We're going to talk a little bit now more about coronavirus and China, and why, as it turns out, Trump was exactly right about China. And in fact, he doesn't go far enough on China. And not only does coronavirus prove this, but many other instances in the last year have proved this also. Things like South Park versus China, and the banning of Winnie the Pooh, and the NBA, and their little controversy with China, and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, I've already blown 12 minutes. Let's get right into the article here so we can actually discuss this. This is from The Hill, an opinion piece written by Madison Gesiotto, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name. Coronavirus shows Donald Trump was right all this time about China. Got to get that OK symbol when you do it. China, right? Donald Trump has been insisting for years that our country has been too economically dependent on China. So it is sad that it took a global public health crisis to prove that he was right all this time. When he began imposing strategic tariffs on China in response to its long history of abusive trade practices, the liberals all of a sudden became free trade fundamentalists, predicting that this new trade war would harm the American economy because we have relied so heavily on cheap Chinese imports for so many years. Instead, it was the Chinese government that took a hard hit, while our economy at home surged to its strongest performance in half a century. To be fair, that's all true. What happened? The answer is simple. Just as manufacturers had once moved their factories to China to take advantage of cheap labor, weak regulations, and lower tariffs on exports to developed economies, these companies are now fleeing China for other countries that offer similar business advantages without all of the political baggage from Beijing. The coronavirus outbreak around the world could dramatically accelerate the manufacturing exodus from China as companies begin to recognize the perils of giving the authoritarian country so much power over their supply chains. After Beijing placed hundreds of millions of its citizens under an oppressive quarantine, effectively shutting down most of its economy for weeks, the need to diversify production locations should have become abundantly clear to business leaders around the world. Businesses that followed the lead of the president, however, were already ahead of the curve. The executives understood those artificial advantages that China always utilized to prop up its economy were going to disappear under the pressure of his tariffs, and the steps they took in anticipation of that, such as relocating production to other countries, ultimately reduced their exposure to the coronavirus crisis, and its damaging consequences. The reason for disengaging from China in the first place was to protect American workers and businesses. While the coronavirus could not have been predicted, there is always a significant risk from the overdependence on any single country, especially an authoritarian one that will routinely break the rules in its quest to get ahead. The coronavirus merely happened to be the crisis that demonstrated once and for all why the free trade status quo that was rooted in past decades was so dangerous to our country. Now, I do slightly disagree with this to an extent. I agree with the general premise of this article, absolutely, and I love the piece for sure. But there are certain things that I do disagree with, like, for example, when she says that the reason for this is over-reliance on a single country. I don't think that the problem has anything to do with over-reliance on a single country. In fact, I am a firm believer in autarky. Excuse me, I said that wrong twice. Autarky, my apologies, autarky, which is the idea that we should have a self-sufficient and independent economy, right? I want the means of production to be in the United States. I want the headquarters of these companies to be in the United States. I want the jobs that these companies are providing to be in the United States. Their call centers when people are asking for customer service to be in the United States, and so on and so forth, right? I'm definitely very big on keeping businesses in the United States and having an autarkic kind of economy. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm against necessarily free trade and foreign trade and things like that. It just means that I think we should have the ability, if need be, to cut off the entire world and have a fully functioning and even prosperous economy, right? That doesn't mean we need to do that, but just in case something were to happen that caused us to need to, cut off the world, I think we definitely should have the ability to do that. Obviously, there's certain things that we will just not be able to provide if we have, if we actually had to cut off the rest of the world. For example, there's nowhere they might grow in like Hawaii and like artificial places in Florida, but bananas, naturally speaking, don't grow in the United States, right? Fine. The country can survive and even live prosperously without bananas, right? And this is only one of those things where it's almost like a backup, if you will, right? Say you have a lot of reliance on other people in your personal life, right? And you're constantly relying on somebody else to provide the food for you. You're constantly, and as a matter of fact, that's actually really, really, I was about to kind of just list this whole, all these things. That's really similar, that's really similar to what we actually do here in the United States and in many prosperous countries, right? I rely on the grocery store. I rely on the gas station. I rely on the existence of the roads there, right? You become kind of interdependent. And God forbid, if something were to actually happen that disrupted that interdependency, the entire system collapses and turns into total chaos. Whereas if I actually do have, some backup food, potentially some backup energy, if that's possible, right? Maybe a stockpile of certain things that I'm going to need for the long run, just kind of always as a general rule, then when this sort of thing happens, I become more self-sufficient, and the economy and culture and nation as a whole end up being stronger as a result because the individual parts are stronger, right? So, for the record, the reason to even say that is that autarky actually ends up improving the global economy also. But we should have that ability as a nation to, whether it's farming or manufacturing cars or electronics or, textile mills or anything, that we actually are going to need to keep a functioning and prosperous economy, we should have the ability to produce that and distribute it also here in the United States. And of course, by strictly capitalistic means. So I don't actually have a problem with over-reliance on one country. I firmly believe we should have over-reliance on ourselves. Just decided it was going to reload, my apologies. But, that being said, right, I do think over-reliance on a specifically dictatorial communist country that has shown willingness to violently put down Hong Kong protests.
The Hill's opinion contributor Madison Jessiato writes in a new op-ed
to violently put down any sort of want for Tibetan independence, to force people to not recognize what is a legitimate nation in Taiwan in order to try to do business with them, to put Christians and Muslims and Falun Gong into literal concentration camps, to ban things like Winnie the Pooh, right? People who have this kind of a mentality like China does, right? To put so much trust in them is completely ridiculous. They're an oppressive, dictatorial, and outright evil regime. And dare I say it's slightly conspiratorial, because there is a lot of people in Hollywood, in Silicon Valley, and in Washington, D.C., and in New York City, which are sort of the centers of power in the United States, if you will, right, who are definitely very, very socialist, and China appears to be a working version of socialism. Of course, it appears to be that way if you forget the fact that they slaughter Christians and Muslims in Falun Gong, and that they slaughter Tibetans, and that they violently crack down on Hong Kong protesters, and that they ban things like Winnie the Pooh and a whole bunch of other basic things because the Grand Pooh Bear up there, President Jinping, is offended that somebody says he looks like a yellow bear, which, by the way, is ridiculous, you child. You small man syndrome little child. I mean, I'm sorry, I have no respect for that scum for multiple reasons, but part of the reasons is that he is just such words you can't use because they're not very appropriate, right? He's a little person, to say the least. The fact that we're going to put so much, trust in them, the fact that we're going to put so much of our own economy over there with them, it is really just ridiculous. And in my opinion, it's indicative of people who want to see all of the rosy parts of communism, if there can actually be said to be any rosy parts of communism, so that they could try and justify implementation of it here. I know that sounds awfully conspiratorial, but it is awfully weird that all the tech companies want to move to China, that all these other companies have always wanted to move to China, that tons of politicians get rich because they get funded by China, that we end up taking out debts from China, that people in China have all these evil things that they're doing, and hardly anybody even talks about it. And if you do talk about it, you're way too far to the right, and you're a racist and a fascist and blah, 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 right? So, call me conspiratorial, but it reeks of conspiracy. So, there's that. But, nonetheless, let's go ahead and get back to this point. Well, actually, one last thing I do want to say. It's not just that China is dictatorial. It's not just that China has, all of these oppressive policies. It's not just that they're a foreign nation and therefore we shouldn't be propping them up when we could be propping ourselves up. And I don't mean that in a sort of greedy way, but I mean that like to the detriment of us, we prop China up, right? That's not something any nation should do. But on top of that, China is our enemy. Let's be perfectly clear here. China is our enemy. We sit here and we talk constantly about Russia and Iran and North Korea and Venezuela and blah, 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 blah. I mean, all these nonsense red herrings when we have an actual enemy, a savage dragon that is very powerful, right, that we basically do nothing about. In my opinion, and I know this is incredibly radical for modern politics, but I think it should be true, I would have complete and total embargo on China, no trade whatsoever, absolutely none. And I would have military bases everywhere that I can put them surrounding China. I want them in Japan. I want them in South Korea. I want them in the Philippines. I want them in Singapore, right? I want them in Taiwan, if Taiwan will allow me. If any of those people will allow me, of course, because I don't want to intrude upon them. But to be fair, none of them like China, right? So it's in all their best interest also. And, I would be sitting there like, make a move, I dare you, because realistically, that's how we should be with China, because China is our enemy, and they are not to be trusted. They are an evil, evil, evil enemy. They are the kind of enemy that we were fighting in Nazi Germany, not the kind of enemy that we're fighting over in Afghanistan, right, where it's just a pointless foreign war because we need to have our forever wars. No, this is an evil enemy that wants to take out the United States, has made that perfectly clear, right, and we basically just let them do it. We're just completely cool with selling our country, whether it's economically or militarily or in the power that we have in the United Nations. It doesn't matter. We're just completely fine with selling our souls to China, and to the detriment, obviously, of the United States. But nonetheless, I want to continue with the article because it's almost done. Incidentally, the coronavirus also validates the border security agenda of the president. Closing the country off to travelers from areas affected by the outbreak is one of the most effective steps that we can take to limit its spread within our country, and Trump wasted no time in implementing that safeguard. He was roundly criticized by the left, which was primarily concerned with the possibility that restricting travel from China could promote bias against Asians, which is ridiculous. But at this point, pretty much everyone can agree on the importance of knowing whether people entering the United States from overseas might pose a security threat to American citizens. Sounds an awfully lot like the argument Trump makes about the need to secure our borders against rampant illegal immigration. It's because it is. I mean, to be fair, for all the things that I disagree with Trump on, these two issues in particular, I am almost Trumpian completely, right? He's right on the money when it comes to, our need to have stronger border security and to solve the illegal immigration problem. And he's right on the money when it comes to China and trade. Although maybe not right on the money. I guess I'm probably a little bit farther. I go a little bit farther on those issues than Trump does. But it's nice to have somebody who even addresses them at all, right? Where was I on this? Sorry. The president, of course, had no idea or advanced knowledge of the coronavirus. Trump just as well crafted policy agenda that is equally well suited to protect our country from the coronavirus as it is to creating a strong and growing economy, that generates lasting and broad prosperity and that reaches all American individuals and families. And I completely agree with that there. Like I said, I do wish that we had a little bit more of an emphasis on potential autarky. I think we do definitely need an autarky. I'm very protectionist in a lot of ways, so I understand that people have problem with that. I do actually love the president's quote when he says, "I'm okay with free trade, but it's got to be fair trade." That's exactly correct. And also, it's got to be with people who don't have, a vested interest in destroying my country. I just think that that's a basic requirement. But who knows? Maybe that's just me and not the rest of the political establishment or even the voting base, right? Now, to move on, there is some and you guys already obviously know this because this is the title that we have to start this particular issue, or this particular episode, rather. There is a very serious border issue going on in Europe. Really on the border of Europe, because I would not consider Turkey to be part of Europe. But I guess I'm not 100% sure if Turkey is considered part of Europe. Nonetheless, there is a very serious border dispute on the border of Europe between Greece and Turkey at this current time. And, how crazy does it end up getting? I guess we don't know. Finally, after after a decade and a half of Greece just being bullied relentlessly by the European Union and caving in to the detriment of Greek citizens, causing greater crime rates, causing greater unemployment rates, an absolutely collapsing economy. Greece is practically a third world nation at this point. Finally, Greece has decided to say, y'all can kick rocks. We are going to have the interest of Greeks at heart. And that, my friends, let me just say real quick, is something that I greatly admire. I think that is the way every nation should be, right? It's one thing to be fascist or racist or things like that, right? You can certainly take, or chauvinist even, right? You can certainly take patriotism and nationalism too far. But it is a basic, fundamental requirement of a morally sane person to want to take care of their own tribe. And if all of us take care of our own tribe, then all of the tribes end up being strong, right? That's just the way that it should be. And by the way, you even get that down to an individualistic level, because in reality, each of the individual cogs in the machine, namely the individual, needs to be strong in and of themselves, right? If we have strong individuals, then we have strong families. Strong families breed strong communities breed strong provinces, which breed strong nations, which breeds a stronger race as a whole, right? And it doesn't have to be anything that's associated with hatred of other groups or anything like that. But nationalism is a good thing. It just needs to be nationalism for all nations, right? Not a single nationalism for a single nation. But nonetheless, this issue is escalating quite quickly. We'll see how quickly and to what extent it ends up escalating. There has been vigilantes actually going around in Greece fighting, for lack of a better term, migrants. So, I mean, it is definitely getting violent for sure. But whether or not that involves the actual nations themselves, of course, will be a completely different story. But let's go ahead and read this article here. This is from, and I'm sorry, I'm absolutely going to mispronounce this name, Leferis Papadimus, and also Essie Toksebe. Sorry, like I said, I knew for a fact I would be mispronouncing that, and that was definitely terribly pronounced. But nonetheless, this is coming from, I believe, Reuters? Yes, Reuters.com. And it is about the Greece-Turkey migrant crisis. Amid migrant crisis, Greece and Turkey conflict plays out on social media. Gotta love coffee, right? Greeks and Turks are waging a proxy war on social media with photios. Man, I do not talk well enough to be doing these shows, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to continue doing them anyway. Greeks and Turks are waging a proxy war on social media with photos, videos, and commentary purporting to show the other side behaving badly in a migrant crisis that has seriously strained already tense relations between Athens and Ankara. And actually, as you can see here, there is a Humvee complete with some soldiers there. These are Greek soldiers. They're on the border, actually. It actually says here in the picture where, in particular, they are. The Parzarkul border crossing, which is in Castanese Greek. And I probably pronounced those incorrectly, but nonetheless, you can see the description here for yourself. It's not highlighting, my apologies. But it's right underneath the picture. I'm sure you guys can see it. An estimated 35,000 migrants from the Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and elsewhere have been trying to enter Greece, a European Union member state, since Ankara said on February 28th that it would no longer keep migrants on its territory as required under a 2016 deal with the European Union in return for aid. Greece has used tear gas and water cannon to hold them back. On Greek Twitter, the hashtags Greece under attack and Greece defends Europe have become common. On Turkish Twitter, Kapeyunin, or Greek B word, was rather briefly a trending topic. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu, used the tag Greece attacks refugees. Mevlut Cavusoglu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right either. I really should have people pronounce these for me before, because I never learned how to pronounce them, and I'm not going to get any better at pronouncing them just by looking over the words myself. But nonetheless, one video circulating on Monday appeared to show a tractor on the Greek side spraying liquid towards the border fence, dousing hundreds of migrants gathering on the Turkish side. Some Greek social media users speculated it was a farmer spraying pig urine along the border. Turkish social media users said it showed Greek police and farmers spraying chemical weapons and tagged the United Nations. The heated online exchange draws on a long history of conflict between Muslim Turkey and Christian Greece, which today remained at loggerheads over issues such as Cyprus and drilling for gas in the eastern Mediterranean, as well as over migrants. Turkey, which hosts 3.6 million Syrian refugees, says the EU has failed to honor its promises of aid. Brussels and Athens accuse Ankara of goading migrants to storm the border in a bid to blackmail Europe into offering more cash and supporting its geopolitical aims in the Syrian conflict. And this is something that has been very well documented. It's not just Brussels and Athens that are claiming this. Numerous quote-unquote right-wing news outlets in Canada and the United States and Britain have been pointing this out constantly, for years now. In fact, it was such a big issue, people were actually talking about, why is Turkey involved in NATO? They are clearly not a friend of Europe or a friend of the United States. It was being talked about even by the mainstream news organizations, right? So, the idea that this is somehow conspiratorial on the side of Athens and Brussels is just insane, right? It is hilariously insane. It's one of those things where it's really more dishonest than anything else, because we all actually know what the facts are. We've been fully aware of the facts for multiple years now at this point. Stripped down to underwear, the article says. Photos unverified by Reuters Reuters, have shown migrants apparently being stripped to their underwear after being caught on the Greek side of the border and then sent back. Others show Turkish forces allegedly attempting to dismantle parts of the border fence to make it easier for migrants to cross. Turkey says Greek forces are firing live ammunition and that they've killed 4 migrants last week, claims that Athens denies. As nationalist passions have flared on both sides, Greek television interviewed 3 men dressed in combat fatigues who were headed out in a small boat, with their German Shepherd dog to patrol the Evros River delta along the border from migrants. Among the accounts frequently retweeting videos and commentary from the Turkish side has been Russia Today, while other Russian commentators have suggested that Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan is increasingly focusing his military attention on Greece. Turkey and Greece are NATO allies, at least allegedly. That word allies definitely needs to be put in quotations. The NATO, and the whole concept of NATO is honestly just ridiculous, but not that it matters. Is this video playing? No, it does not have sound. Good. Okay. All this comes as Turkey and Russia face off in the Syrian conflict, where Ankara backs anti-government rebels, while Moscow, however you pronounce that, it's Moscow. What am I talking about? Is a key ally of President Bashar al-Assad. The media manipulation and disinformation have even extended to the coronavirus outbreak. One Turkish commentator suggested that Greece was filled with coronavirus, unlike Turkey, and just back to the schoolyard with them kind of insults. I love it. And recommended never visit Greece, even as Erdogan actively encourages migrants to move there. Greece has 73 confirmed cases of coronavirus, but no fatalities, a relatively low toll for Europe. Turkey has no confirmed cases so far. So, as you can see here, there is definitely very, very high tensions between the nations of Greece and Turkey, as well as the populaces in Greece and Turkey. We are absolutely seeing a flare in what was already very tense relations between these countries. And honestly, I would not be surprised if it ended up actually getting violent, if it has not gotten violent already. Obviously, Athens denies having killed any migrants. Turkey obviously says that that is not the case. They have indeed killed migrants. It's believable because there is military on both sides who is on this border, as well as Greek militia groups and vigilante groups, right, who are going out trying to search for migrants. So it's not necessarily outside of the realm of possibility that Greece has indeed killed migrants. It is within reason for Greeks to want to be killing migrants at this point, so long as it's something that is done in a... It's hard to necessarily say, because the thing about it is you really have to, and I know, all of this comes with the idea of like, well, what if they're just people who are trying to find a different life, all that kind of stuff. It is a sensitive issue because of that, and I grant all of that, absolutely. From the perspective of a Greek person at this point, though, these are people who are filled with people who are Islamist and terroristic in nature. There is a nation now that is Islamist in nature that wants these people to be in Europe. That seems kind of nefarious. Likewise, we have seen nationalism and patriotic pride being stripped from every nation in Europe, and that has been absolutely true with Greece. I mean, in Greece, it's funny sometimes to even consider that Greece is actually a European nation that's supposed to be one of the first world nations. You know what I mean? Because it's not, really. It really is not. It's a very poor nation. It's a nation with very corrupt politics, very corrupt police, nation where you really don't want to be opening businesses and things like that. There's lots of gangs, high crime, everybody's impoverished, and it's the European Union's fault. It's all because they have been stripped of their ability to govern themselves and be a functioning nation, which they are, right? And this is why I say you need nationalism for all nations, because if you just want nationalism for some nations, then these nations end up putting down other nations. Realistically speaking, globalism is just nationalism on a greater scale, right? and the nationalism doesn't work on a greater scale. That's why it's nationalism, right? It works on the scale of nations. It doesn't, but really what you want, what you're having with globalism is just nationalism on a greater scale. We want nationalism, but for the European continent. Thing is, it doesn't work that way. The European continent is not a nation. It's a collection of multiple nations, and nationalism only works for nations. That's why it's nationalism, right? Not continentalism or globalism or anything else like that. These different unions and so on and so forth. So, all that to say, it makes a lot of sense for Greece not only to have killed these migrants, but to want to kill these migrants, right? Bear in mind, when you say kill these migrants, from their perspective, you're talking about an invading force of foreigners who are very committed to the destruction of your country. It's not just people who are coming over to get a better life, right? And in some instances, it is. So it is something that has to be taken with discretion, absolutely. Which, of course, puts a little bit of moral justification on Turkey's side, and a little bit of moral justification on people who want to be anti-Greek on this side. And that fans the flames of this entire conflict, absolutely. That being said, I do think Greece is the gateway, right? It's the hot gates, if you will. Greece is Thermopylae. And it absolutely needs a Leonidas to defend it from, or to not defend it in itself, because that is true, but to defend Europe, to defend the continent of Europe, we need absolutely some kind of a Leonidas in Greece to defend from the massive Islamist brigade, the masses of Islamist brigades, that are stemming from the Middle East at this point. You can call it anti-Islamic if you like. I will even grant that. Yes, I am anti-Islamic. Do you want to know why? Because Islam is bad, right? In Europe, in the United States, in Canada, at least, when we're all functioning the way that we're supposed to be functioning, you have a right to be a Muslim. But in Muslim-controlled nations and Islamist-controlled nations, you don't have a right to be a Christian, right? So, yeah, I am definitely against Islamist brigades coming into the nations of Western countries, or any nations for that matter. Stay over there. Okay, if you want to come over here and be a part of our culture, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to not speak Arabic or not have Arabic pride. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to not be a Muslim, right? That doesn't mean any of that sort of stuff. You can totally be here, have Arabic pride, be a Muslim, and also speak English and have American pride and understand that Islamism is something that we do not tolerate and all those other kinds of things, right? And to be fair, in the United States, it is a little bit different in this regard. This isn't something that's necessarily true of all the European countries, but we don't want any sort of Christo-fascism in the United States here either, right? Devoted Christian here, and I will say I want separation of church and state, because the union of church and state in Europe, right, 500 years ago, and even sometimes even now, right, and 1,000 years ago, and so on and so forth, led to the deaths of many, many people who believe like I do, and many people who don't believe like I do, because quite frankly, that doesn't even matter, right? But even just to make it hit home, many people who believe like I do, right? Whether it was Protestants or, what I would kind of call pre-Reformation Protestants, although they're not literally Protestants, right? But nonetheless, right, there was tons and tons of religious-motivated torture, slaughter, rape, and pillaging, and so I am absolutely for the separation of church and state. And I grant that as an olive branch to people who say, well, are you, against Islam? I'm against Islam from a cultural standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, from a religious standpoint. But as far as from the government, I am only against any religion as far as it tries to infiltrate my government. And that includes my very own religion, right? I don't want it infiltrating my government. That doesn't necessarily mean we don't have godly governments, right? I certainly do, I'll be honest, I feel a lot more comfortable electing people who believe like I do, because I believe that if they believe like I do, not only will they have a greater respect for the Constitution, just because that seems to have been the case throughout American history, but also, I am definitely looking for the blessings of God upon this country, and so, to a certain extent, obviously, your religion is always going to influence your voting, but when you start actually blending the two together, now you have a problem. Islamism is coming in wanting that over all of these European nations. And these Greek people are saying, we don't want that. We don't appreciate that. We don't approve of that. We want to defend ourselves and our culture from things like that. And I completely 100% agree. And I even think that it is vital for the survival of Europe and Western civilization, because Greece is the hot gates. And it has always been the hot gates, and it will always be the hot gates. Just because Thermopylae was 25 or 2,400 years ago does not mean at all that they somehow are no longer... Actually, you know what? Thermopylae was exactly 2,500 years ago. Interesting. Anyways, not the point. The point is, it doesn't mean that they somehow cease being the hot gates just because that happened at that time, right? That is the pathway, if you will, from the Middle East into the nations of Europe. And if Greece falls to Islamism, then Europe will fall to Islamism. Absolutely, at least barring, use another historical reference, barring a Charles Martel, maybe. Because we did see, obviously, Spain fall from the other side. But, it's a little different with Spain. I mean, the heart of Islamism is not Morocco, right? And it's never been Morocco. And it will never be Morocco, quite frankly. But the heart of Islamism is definitely right there, whether it's Turkey, Iran, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, right? They're all right there. So, Greek nationalism, independence, and strength is absolutely vital to the preservation of the nations that we call our allies and the culture that we call our heritage. So I am 100% on the side of Greece in this situation. That being said, I certainly do understand that there's a lot of danger in this situation. There's a lot of potential for Greeks to act immorally and unethically, and I definitely don't approve of any of that. For example, if any migrants are being killed who are just women and children, I don't think that is legitimate by any stretch of the imagination. You should keep moral high ground when you fight in wars. But nonetheless, we'll see what happens. I doubt it ends up turning into a full-fledged armed conflict, but it certainly could. The Greeks and the Turks have hated each other for literal hundreds of years at this point. I mean, I can't recall dates because I'm not an expert by any stretch on Ottoman history, but I know Suleiman the Magnificent, couple hundred years ago at least, was invading Greece, right? So, I mean, it goes back all the way then, and even further. I mean, the Seljuk Turks, that's an area that I do definitely know a lot more about, were attacking Constantinople 1,000 years ago, right? So there's bad blood with these people going back very, very, very long periods of time. So it wouldn't be surprising necessarily if this confrontation did get violent, though I don't actually think it will. That said, I am definitely pro-Greece. I think this is our modern Thermopylae, and the fall of Greece will result in the fall of Western civilization, absolutely. So it is definitely imperative for the survival of Western civilization as it exists, on the continent of Europe, that Greece does not fall to Islamism. Fair warning, our next topic deals with sex exclusively and also pornography. So if that's not something you are interested in, please do turn away now. Anti-Pornhub petition gains steam, accusing adult video giant of facilitating sex trafficking. This is by Sam Dorman. We're going to try and go over this pretty quickly, but I wanted to point it out, namely because, number one, I do think it will have a very obvious effect on how platforms are able to actually operate in the future. But number two, and I think much more importantly, I think that from a cultural standpoint, this should wake us up. The fact that this seems to constantly happen, right? The fact that there is sex trafficking around Harvey Weinstein, the fact that there is sex trafficking around Tumblr, the fact that there is sex trafficking around Pornhub. It almost seems to imply that quote-unquote sexual liberation leads directly to sexual exploitation. And I don't mean to say I told you so, but literally every cultural conservative ever told you so, right? So just kind of wanted to point that out for everybody now that we coincidentally have the largest pornography giant in the United States. arguably facilitating sex trafficking. This is from Fox News. And the writer, let me find the name of the writer before we continue, is Sam Dorman. I already said that, actually. An anti-Pornhub petition with the goal of shutting down the adult video giant and holding its executives accountable for allegedly facilitating human trafficking has acquired nearly 370,000 signatures. The petition is addressed to U.S. and Canadian officials and targets the CEO and COO of MindGeek, which owns Pornhub. Anti-trafficking activist Lila Micklethwait started the petition claiming that Pornhub makes it too easy for sex traffickers to feature victims in videos uploaded to the site. As of Thursday, the petition has more than 367,000 signatures. Quote, "They're set up for exploitation," end quote, Micklethwait told Fox News in an interview, adding that she plans to formally notify the Trump administration of the petition. The petition points to several instances of trafficked victims appearing on pornographic sites, including an underage girl who was missing for nearly a year before her mother learned that 60 pornographic videos of her had been posted to Pornhub, Snapchat, Periscope, and Model Hub. As Micklethwait noted on Twitter, Pornhub described the girl as a verified model with valid ID. Human trafficking in America among worst in world, according to this report, which is very interesting, and I suggest you read it. The link to all my articles are in the description, so you can get this link in the link to this particular article that I'm reading. But at any rate, quote, "Pornhub is generating millions in advertising and membership revenue with 42 billion visits and 6 million videos uploaded per year," the petition reads. Yet it has no system in place to verify reliably the age of consent of those featured in the pornographic content it hosts and profits from. End quote. Further quote, "In fact," the petition goes on, "all that is needed to upload pornography onto Pornhub is an email address. No government-issued ID is required, not even to become verified with its trusty blue check mark that makes everything seem A-OK," end quote. Micklethwait added that Pornhub also does not have any reliable system in place to verify that those in the video it hosts are not trafficked children being raped on film in order to line the pockets of its executives. On Friday, Pornhub told Fox News that Micklethwait's petition was factually wrong and intentionally misleading. Just one moment. Quote, "Pornhub has a steadfast commitment to eradicating and fighting any and all illegal content on the internet, including non-consensual content and child sexual abuse material. Any suggestion otherwise is categorically and factually inaccurate. While the wider tech community must continue to develop new methods to rid the internet of this horrific content, Pornhub is actively working to put in place state-of-the-art comprehensive safeguards on its platform to combat this material," end quote, said Pornhub Vice President Blake White in a statement provided to Fox News. White added, quote, "These actions include a robust system for flagging, reviewing, and removing all illegal material, employing an extensive team of human moderators dedicated to manually reviewing all uploads to the site, and using a variety of digital fingerprinting solutions. We use automated detection technologies such as YouTube's CSAI match and Microsoft's Photo DNA as added layers of protection to keep unauthorized content off the site. We also use Vobile, a state-of-the-art fingerprinting software that scans any new uploads for potential matches to unauthorized material to protect against any banned video from being re-uploaded to the platform. We are actively working on expanding our safety measures and adding new features and products to our platform to this end as they become available. Furthermore, Pornhub will continue to work with law enforcement efforts and child protection nonprofits in the goal of eliminating any and all illegal content across the internet," end quote. Micklethwait later responded to Pornhub's statement, telling Fox News, quote, "Pornhub allows users to upload content to their website with only an email address, no verification of age or consent of those in the videos. This is a factually accurate statement and can be proven by anyone. They also will verify anyone with only a photo and a piece of paper stating a username. Again, no verification of age or consent required. This is a policy and practice that enables rampant sexual exploitation of vulnerable women and children throughout the site," end quote. The video sharing site reported that it garnered 42 billion visits, or an average of 115 million visits per day in 2019. In addition, a record 6.83 million videos were uploaded to the site last year. Quote, "To put this in perspective, if you strung all of 2019's new video content together and started watching them way back in 1850, you'd still be watching them today, end quote, according to Pornhub. Micklethwaite's organization started a website called TraffickingHub.com, mocking the video giant, and is promoting a protest at Pornhub's Montreal headquarters on March 8th, which is International Women's Day. And of course, that was actually 2 days ago at the point of me recording this video. And depending on how quickly I get this up, it's either going to be 2 or 3 days after that particular event for you guys watching this, if you're watching it as soon as I put it up, of course. The petition was addressed to several U.S. senators, including Senators Mark Rubio of Florida and Rob Portman of Ohio, both of who were Republicans, who have previously sponsored anti-sex trafficking legislation. Quote, any person or company responsible for human trafficking or facilitating it, especially the sexual exploitation and abuse of children, should be punished to the full extent of the law, end quote, Rubio said in a statement provided to Fox News. Quote, I will work with my colleagues to close an archaic loophole in federal law that allows anybody to escape prosecution, end quote. Portman told Fox News that he would, quote, continue to work to ensure that no more men, women, or children fall victim to this terrible crime, end quote. His legislation, titled Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, became law in 2018 and outlaws companies from knowingly assisting or facilitating sex trafficking. The Justice Department declined to comment. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's a Democrat from California, obviously, Bernie Sanders, who is an independent from Vermont, and Elizabeth Warren, who is a Democrat from Massachusetts. Both Warren and Sanders are, well, actually, Warren has dropped out at this point, but Sanders is currently running for the Democratic nomination for president in 2020. All three of these have backed legislation that would study the effects of Portman's bill. The bill is viewed by its sponsor, Representative Ro Khanna, who is a Democrat from California, as a step towards legalizing sex work. According to Khanna's office, the law has forced sex workers off of online platforms and into more dangerous situations. Quote, sex workers have relied on such internet platforms to screen clients and negotiate boundaries for consensual transactional sex services, including condom use and other harm reduction strategies, end quote, Khanna said in a press release in December. It is unclear how Khanna's legislation would impact Pornhub. Micklethwaite's petition was also addressed to Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican from Montana, who recently introduced legislation to reauthorize a comprehensive study on human trafficking. Quote, at any moment there could be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of individuals being trafficked into the United States, but we have no way of knowing just how widespread the horrific crime really is, end quote, Hawley said in a statement provided to Fox News. Hawley added, quote, if we're going to make effective policy decisions around this, we have to get the data necessary to understand just how pervasive it is, both in our communities and online. That's why I've introduced a bill to commission the first comprehensive federal study on human trafficking in more than a decade. This is a major step in moving the ball forward so we can help victims and put criminals behind bars, end quote. So, we see here that there is a very interesting situation going on with this particular company, i.e. Pornhub. Namely, that they, at least allegedly, have knowingly facilitated sex trafficking, rape videos, and videos of people having sex with minors. Some cases even pedophilic, meaning that they were before the post-pubescent era of their life, right? So, obviously, if that's true, that is very, very wrong. That is something that needs to be punished, and to the highest extent of the law, because regardless of your status of platform publisher or anything else like that, you are knowingly facilitating a crime and therefore are obviously an accomplice to it. And so, if that is the case, obviously there are people who need to be going to prison. If it is not the case, then we do still have an issue here of the videos of this nature, of this sexually exploitative nature, are definitely appearing in mass numbers on your website. And that is a problem. Now, if indeed they are not actually knowingly facilitating this, then it's not a problem I think they should be held legally accountable for. I think that could set a very dangerous precedent. If indeed you are to be a platform, you cannot be held legally accountable for what is said by the users on your platform. That is the whole reason we have the distinguishment, right, between publishers and platforms in the first place, right? If you're a publisher, you have editorial control, and therefore you can actually be held accountable for direct calls to action, facilitating crimes like sexual exploitation of minors and etc., libel and slander and etc., right? However, if you're just a platform, then you're just providing this space for people to actually, go out and do things themselves. And so long as you're not knowingly facilitating any of the crimes, right, and becoming an accomplice to them, all of these crimes and things that you would, go to a civil court for and all those other kinds of things end up being strictly on the user and not actually the platform itself. So, the opinion you end up taking on Pornhub here varies dramatically based off of the actual involvement of the company. If the company is involved, then this company needs to be shut down. They need to be audited. The people need to be thrown in prison. There needs to be an investigation, right, etc. There needs to be a very hard crackdown on the website. However, if they are not actually involved, then we cannot punish them for what their creators or for what creators on their platform have actually done, because that's not actually their fault. And in fact, that is a liberty that we greatly cherish in this country, because it's what allows us to publish things that may not be, philosophically or culturally accepted or politically accepted or anything else like that on something like YouTube or Facebook. And yet Facebook and YouTube can't be held accountable for that. Or even in some cases, things like fake news, and yet Facebook can't be held accountable for that because it's not Facebook's fault, right? And I very much want to keep that in play. Regardless of the legal implications, the fact of the matter is the largest pornography website in the United States and Canada is having a very dangerous trend of sexually exploitative videos on their platform. And what I am saying to you is that regardless of the position you take legally, regardless of the position you take politically on this particular issue, we need to understand that this is what happens in the quote-unquote sexual liberation culture, right? I'm not going to sit up here and pretend to you guys that I've never watched pornography. That would be an absolute lie, right? In fact, if I'm being completely honest, I've struggled with it a little bit more than your average human being. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it just by any stretch of the imagination. It just simply means that I have partaken in the sexual exploitation of women and girls, and in the basically degradation of any sort of willpower in men and boys, right? Pornography and all other sorts of aspects of sexual liberation, polyamory, polygamy, homosexuality, promiscuity, fornication, going out and having models and sexually liberated people as far as their clothing is concerned, and constantly endorsing sex in movie and TV and things like that. These have demonstrably negative effects on the country. This is a fact. This is a basic fact of life. And we are seeing this constantly all the time. Is it any coincidence that when you go to Harvey Weinstein, and he happens to be the one or one of the ones who is propping up the massive Hollywood regime, right? And it just so happens to be that he's involved in sexual exploitation of people? Damn, that's almost like 100% expected, considering that they always want to publish things that have very high very high value on sex, right? Very high value in people's beauty. They want to show you people's breasts and people's legs and people's stomachs and their muscles and all this other kind of stuff, and throw it down your throat constantly. And you need to accept people being gay, and you need to accept people being polygamous, and you need to accept women dressing promiscuously or working in sex work, and yada yada yada, all the way down, right? Is it any coincidence? I don't think so. Pornography is just that to the nth extent. And is it any coincidence? No, I don't think so. Absolutely not. This is honestly something that has been talked about for years and years and years by people who have actually left these industries, whether it's the entertainment industry or the pornography industry or many other industries also. Any industry that relies on the exploitation, because that's what it is, even if it is consensual exploitation. It is exploitation. Any industry that relies on the sexual exploitation of human beings, right, is evil at its core, and it will inevitably attract people who we all agree are horribly immoral and who need to be stopped, right? That is just the way that the world works. If you disagree, you don't know the way that the world works. I'm sorry to be so blunt with it, but that is the facts. And we are seeing that whether it's Tumblr, whether it's Pornhub, whether it's Harvey Weinstein and Hollywood, right? We are seeing that constantly being shown to be true time and time and time and time and time and time and time again. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's literally nothing you can do about it because it is just simply the facts of life. Okay? So, what is the solution then? The solution is not to be sexually exploitative or sexually liberated, as the liberals would put it, right? The solution is to do exactly what the traditionalists but the Christians have been saying for years and years and years. Monogamous, heterosexual, lifelong family bonds are the way that sex is supposed to be used. You're supposed to be modest, both men and women. Men should not be walking out with their shirts off any more than women should be walking out in crop tops. They are both immodest, they are both immoral, and they both lead to the sexual degradation of human beings. And so on and so forth. I would continue, but to be honest with you, I'm already 5 minutes over my hour. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Yeah, no announcements. So let's just go ahead and wrap up. We'll have another episode of the Watchdog up this week. We're going to discuss a few more articles there. We might have some things that come up at the time. I do want to say briefly before we leave about the coronavirus. Stop panicking, okay? You're fine. I'm fine. We're fine, okay? There's absolutely no harm in preparing around this. There's absolutely no harm in taking care of the elderly and those who are most susceptible to this disease. There's absolutely no harm in mourning for those who have died from this disease. But panicking is going to, and even in the United States so far, is causing a greater problem than the virus itself. Okay, there's no necessity to panic. It's got something like a 3 to 4% death rate. That's lower than MERS. That's lower than Ebola, right? That's lower than SARS. It's lower than an awful lot of contagious diseases. And we're fine. And we're going to be fine. We need to trust in God. We need to trust in the medical professionals that He's given us, right? And we need to go about our daily lives as we normally would. Maybe, the only thing that this should change from us is maybe we should come together and maybe realize that we should take more care of our fellow man. So, next time you see, for example, the Ronald McDonald House or a donation to St. Jude, maybe do that. Even if it's just a couple cents, it helps. And it helps tremendously, right? There's numerous funds. There's funds for people with contagious diseases. I'm sure there's a coronavirus specific fund, right? That's fine. Being charitable is fine. Being prepared is fine. Being aware is fine. Panicking is not fine. It's not fine. It will lead to a greater problem, and it's not warranted, right? We are okay. The nation will be okay. Even the nations hit hardest, like Italy and China, they are going to be okay. We are all going to be fine. Okay? We just need to have faith in the Lord, and He will provide for us if we have faith in Him. And of course, if we glorify Him and worship Him. I don't mean to get religious in the end of this, but, I do think that the nation is doomed if it doesn't put God first, regardless of how we prepare. So, if you like this episode of The Watchdog, please do a like and share. Anyways, please do like and share. Subscribe to TheCynicogue if you are interested in the Watchdogs. We also, by the way, have a program hosted by yours truly called Unapologetics, which is entirely religious in nature and is more like, James White's Dividing Line or Ask Dr. Brown's Line of Fire, right? It's an apologetics program. So if you're interested in that or both, please do subscribe here to TheCynicogue. We greatly appreciate it. Leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, or etc. in the comment section below, and in the description you will find links to all 3 articles used here, as well as links to all of our different social media accounts. So we do have actually a Cynicogue account on BitChute. We only actually upload Unapologetics Lite to that particular platform. So a little bit limited in that sense. You won't be getting any Watchdogs there, at least not yet. We do have the Cynicogue on Minds. We have Cynic Thought on Instagram, Terrestrial Earthbird on Twitter. The American Cynic Party on Facebook, and there's one here that I am completely forgetting, but you know what? If I'm forgetting it, it's obviously not that important. There'll be a link to it down there anyways. So thank you guys very much for watching this program. Shalom, stay vigilant, and do not compromise in the face of anything, not even Armageddon.